designer, and she did a series of plaques that are placed both outside of the boathouse and inside of the boathouse. So once we're able to welcome people back into the boathouse for tours, not only will we be able to give personal tours, but also people will be able to walk through at their leisure and kind of understand what's going on in each area based on the plaques. We've had our three rounds of spat bags have come in, and spat bags are something that we place in the harbors to evaluate both natural recruitment and larval release recruitment. These are from natural recruitment, so this is natural spawning events occurring in Nantucket Harbor and Nantucket Harbor, and right now the really high accumulation spots are in Quays and Third Bend and Little Neck over in Nantucket. Also, we have 10 different sites in the head of the harbor that are always accumulate a lot of spat recruit up there. So when we do our 10 days of diving to evaluate the entire harbor, a lot of this will come into play, and we'll have a better idea of where the seed are and where they landed, and if there's any management needed for the seed, if it needs to be moved or if it's close to shore, we'll have a good idea of what we need to do moving into the fall. And I think that's all I have. Jeff, if you have anything you want to add to it.
Yeah, just real briefly, just wanted to put it on your guys' radar. Obviously, we'll be back in touch as it kind of comes to fruition. But we're just in the stages of getting ready to do the harbor plan update. So the Nantucket and Nantucket Harbors action plan update. There's typically been a member of SHAB involved with either the harbor plan committee or the harbor plan implementation committee. Once that's completed, we're anticipating that update process to not take a significant amount of time, but probably the better part of a year. But it's going to be primarily focused on obviously the goals accomplished in the last one and updates to that, but also starting to include some discussion about, sea level rise and climate change, and kind of integrating the Nantucket and Nantucket Harbors action plan in with the hazard mitigation plan and the soon to be put together coastal resiliency plan. So they're kind of all in lockstep moving forward. So stay tuned. There's a real rough draft of an RFP kind of kicking around, and we'll probably have that in front of you guys to take a look at here in pretty short order. But wanted to at least get a little bit of a staff review to make sure that there wasn't something embarrassingly terrible in there. So probably before your next meeting, you guys get a chance to see that and provide any thoughts or things that may have been missed. But for those who don't remember, the harbor plan was the original genesis of the Shellfish management plan, which hopefully one of the actionable items will be to update that plan if we can't roll that in to the existing update. So something to kind of stay tuned to till late 2020 and probably into 2021. But that's coming down the pipe as well. So
Jeff,
I think that's it for us.
Jeff, a question for you on an unrelated matter. JC had called me a few weeks back, maybe over a month ago, about a oyster farming license. Can you update us on that?
Yeah, we'll have a full written report, and we're going to be asking you guys to put that on your next agenda to take up that matter. So we'll get you that whole written narrative in advance. We're finishing putting that together, and then got a little tied up with the other item on the agenda tonight. So we'll hopefully have that for you for your next meeting.
Thank you. Any questions from the board for natural resources? Any questions from the public for natural resources? Not hearing any, I will move on to old business.
Hold on, Andy.
All right.
So it appears I may have sent the email for the agenda to Blair Perkins's wrong address. Does anybody have his address, his email address?
Blair's on his way. He should be about another 10 minutes.
Okay. All right.
All right.
All right.
In old business, we have liveaboard regulations, which we had a wonderful meeting 2 weeks ago. We had participation from several liveaboards. I feel the discussion was very positive. We have not had participation with our harbor master yet, but we anticipate so hopefully at our next meeting. Do any board members have anything more they'd like to discuss while we have the time? Anything from staff they'd like to add? Anybody who'd like a little overview of what we spoke about? Basically, we spoke about, this kind of all started with the boat that was abandoned last year in the Cod of the Bay, ending up on Co-2 and breaking up. We're concerned about liveaboard boats, whether they're under their own power or not. Sheila has a very legitimate concern with boats being Airbnb'd, which poses a problem for the folks who are renting these boats, possibly not having the ability to maneuver the boat if necessary, not know enough about the systems of the boat. So we're looking forward to Sheila's participation on that end of things, especially. I feel the liveaboards seem like a very refined bunch who have been out there for quite some time. It sounds like, they're willing to police each other, knowing that they're living out there by privilege. And so we'd like to keep our regulation changes as little as possible and focus more on the Airbnb, possibly having a better form for registration. I see one of them aboard here, Mr. Frederick.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Is there anything you'd like to recap from our last meeting or add for the future?
About the liveaboards? I mean, about the Airbnb?
Yeah, anything about the liveaboard discussion that we had last week. We're continuing it now. We won't be creating anything new tonight. We won't be taking any votes. We really need to have the harbor master's assistance with this. So it'll be some time before anything comes to fruition. But it is still an open public hearing. So if there's anything more you'd like to add, we have some time until we move into new business.
No, just like I was saying last week, that originally I was against the Airbnb thing, but I've actually come around a bit of a 180 because I see that those boats are better tended than a lot of boats. And that's a big issue out here is boats, no matter what condition they're in, like as far as money wise, they might look pretty, but if nobody's been on board the thing in 3 months, it's just as likely to sink as a boat that doesn't look pretty, And the Airbnb boats, you got guys coming out and flipping the sheets, making sure the batteries are charged, making sure that the tank's pumped out and all that stuff. So I've actually seen boats being better tended with the Airbnb. Now, as to people that are aboard, they're probably on average a little less experienced than a traditional person that would be aboard their boat. But I think that's probably what Sheila is talking about, is like having people out here that don't even realize the weather can kick up, and I don't know how you address that.
Okay. Well, didn't you say something about the mooring handler addressing that and actually asking boats to remove themselves from some moorings for insurance purposes?
Oh yeah, that's a totally different subject than the Airbnb thing. That point I brought up at the end of last meeting was the town puts out a concession to a company, and it's been Nantucket Moorings has gotten it for, forever running. And in return, that the town gets, I think Dave Franzuto said they get 300 grand a year from Nantucket Moorings to run the rental mooring field, which is all fine and good. But I brought up the point that, is there any kind of expectation of service? Like, suppose I got the concession next time it's up for bid, and I say, I'll give you 500 grand a year, right? But I personally don't like boats. So I just pull all the moorings out of the water. And then nobody who comes over here can rent a mooring. You know what I mean? Nobody seasonally can rent a mooring because I've got the 300 or 400 permits or whatever the town gives me, but I just don't like boats. But the town's getting its 500 grand. Would that fly? I think we all agree that shouldn't fly. I think there should be some expectation that if you get the concession, you've got to provide a reasonable service out here in the mooring field. And a part of that reasonable service, I think there should be something about when they can and can't shut down the rental mooring business service. Because the last couple of years, Nantucket Moorings, if they decide that it's blowing too strong, they just kick everybody off the moorings, the rental moorings. They say, yep, we're closed. You got to go away. I don't care if you paid for a season mooring or not. You just have to leave my mooring. I don't know where you're going to go, but somewhere. Well, if the boat basin happens to be open, happens to have room, like if it's in September or if it's in May, that's fine. There's somewhere for guys to go. But if that happens in the middle of July and you've got the boat basin's full, the anchorage is all full, the mooring field's full, and all of a sudden now the mooring field's closed, it could potentially just create chaos, And I get why he's doing it, and his insurance company wants him to not have boats on his moorings when it's blowing above some number. Still, I think it's something that should be looked at.
Well, Bill,
Yeah.
it would be interesting to know what the town requires of the mooring handler, because that doesn't seem right to have to remove yourself from a mooring if a storm is coming.
Or it should be a cut and dried thing. Like, I should know that, okay, if it's going to blow over 70, I got to figure something out because that's the way it is. But right now, it just seems to be at the whim of Nantucket Moorings. They can just decide to not give service. They can just decide, I'm going to shut her down.
Okay. Was that Matt Anderson there?
Hey there.
Huh?
Yes, it is.
Can you help us with? Did you hear what Mr. Fredericks was just talking about?
No, I just got here.
All right. So Nantucket Moorings insurance policy only allows them to keep moorings, boats on a mooring up to a certain wind velocity, possibly. And when the wind picks up to a certain speed, they have to ask their tenants to vacate the moorings.
Yeah, I have no idea how that works. My insurance policy covers hurricanes and everything else. It's something's become an act of God, they call it. But yeah, I have no policy. I don't have to evacuate anybody for my policy.
How many moorings do you handle, Matt?
About 230. Private, no rentals. Yeah.
Okay. Do you pay a fee to the town?
No, I don't do the, that's part of the contract with the rental agreement with the town. All the mooring handlers, none of us pay anything directly to the town.
Okay. Mr. Fredericks, whose mooring are you on?
I just got a mooring permit relatively recently, but in years past, I've rented from Nantucket Moorings.
Okay. Mr. Brace,
Yes.
could you please make a note that we somehow, investigate what the town requires of Nantucket Moorings and their insurance?
I think that, wasn't Dave gonna look into that?
Good question for Mr. Franzuto, yes.
Okay.
Just a reminder, please. Thank you. Anybody else like to chime in on moorings and specifically liveaboards? Josh, anything?
No, I got
Okay.
nothing.
All right, Matt, Jim,
Nope. No, all good.
Peter, do we have Mr. Perkins on board yet?
Oh, you'd see him if you did. He's not here yet. Josh, did you say? When did you think?
Max from Max saying that he was on his way to log in, and that was, I don't know, 20 minutes ago. He said he'd be right there, but
Okay. Well, he's on.
All right, well, if we have no more discussion on liveaboards, we will continue that to our next meeting.
Yes.
And we'll move on to new business. I believe we can start some discussion. It would be nice to yield the floor to Mr. Perkins first, where this is his proposal. Josh, are you involved with Mr. Perkins with this proposal?
I am not.
Okay.
No.
I know there are several people here that are prepared to speak, and I'm willing to move in either direction with this. We can hear from both sides in any order. I just want all discussion to please go through the chair and keep things orderly. So we'll move into new business and open up the discussion on the Nub Rule. And this has been brought to our attention by Blair Perkins. It's on the agenda at his request. Is there anybody who would like to begin some discussion? I believe Mr. Perkins would like to see the Nub Rule removed, rescinded, for whatever is the best term for that. I think there's been a lot of controversy back and forth with the nubs, and I think they don't seem to appear every year. It seems to be kind of a cyclical thing. I don't remember there ever being discussion about nubs in the 70s. Having read some of the information that Mr. Bossi passed on from the mid-2000s, it sounds like a very former sound biologist, Ken Kelly, found the first nub in the early 80s. I'd like to comment that after spending some time with our Shellfish constable, J.C. Johnson, this winter, looking over fishermen's catches, and I think we had some nub issues this year. We had some identity problems this year with the way a lot of seed are the coloration. We did have some catches confiscated. And in my experience from back in the 70s, every scallop that was an adult scallop had a very well-defined growth ring. It was never up near the hinge. Like I said before, there was never any controversy, not even the word nub was not used in relation to scallops that I can recall in the 70s. And in the mid-2000s, when the Nub Rule went into effect, I was living in New Hampshire at the time, so it's not something I'm really familiar with. The information that was in the Vineyard Gazette that Mr. Bossi sent along, and also some information that Mr. Franzuto sent along, was very interesting information, and a lot really to kind of absorb all at once. But looking at it with a simple mind, I'd just like to say that after spending some time with JC this winter, I noticed that identifying an adult scallop can be difficult, especially for somebody with poor eyesight, especially if you've got big, thick gloves on, which everybody out there does. To me, it's more of an identity issue, but certainly the science tells the answer, and I know there's a lot of science on this. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sidlowski,
Valerie Hall would like to speak.
yes,
Hold
good.
Hold on. The board, in matters like this, the board goes first, and then we get to what everyone has to say.
And Peter's
Okay.
right.
But I don't know if you noticed her hand has been up
I
for
did
about
notice.
5 minutes.
I haven't
Okay.
seen Valerie on the screen yet. So Valerie will certainly get her chance to speak. She's
Okay.
already requested time to speak, and I'll be sure she does.
I have a statement.
Mr. Chairman?
I have a statement.
Just a second. Mr. Brace, you have a statement?
I have comments that Dave Franzuto wanted me to read into the record.
Okay, let's do that. Ginger,
Okay.
can you wait a minute?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, this is from Dave Franzuto. Good afternoon. During October of 2008, the town of Nantucket shellfish biologist Jeff Mercer determined that the majority of the scallops did not have a well-defined raised growth line. We had a large number of scallops with the growth line 10 millimeters from the hinge. I petitioned the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries and 3 state biologists, more than 50 years collective experience, came to Nantucket, and 3 state biologists, more than 50 years collective experience, came to Nantucket to determine what was happening. After measuring thousands of scallops, they determined that possibly a 10 millimeter growth line could be temporarily instituted to allow the fishermen to harvest some scallops for what looked like a minimal year. The state biologists took the information that they gathered and discussed the situation with the deputy director and the director of the Division of Marine Fisheries. Then they wanted to gain additional input from other communities that had experience with bay scallops before making the determination to forward the information for consideration to the Massachusetts Fishery Advisory Council. Mercer continued to monitor the catch and measure several thousand more scallops and presented to the Division of Marine Fisheries. The Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board had several more meetings with the fishermen. There was a public hearing held by the Division of Marine Fisheries in Barnstable, which included several biologists, shellfish constables, public officials, and fishermen from many Cape and Island communities. Nantucket fishermen also attended. After much discussion, the information was presented to the Fisheries Council and approved by them and signed by the director to change the definition to 10 millimeters up from the hinge and a 2.5 inch shell height as the harvesting criteria for bay scallops in Massachusetts. This has been in effect since 2008 and has worked far better, giving a clear size / definition for bay scallops, just like every other species of shellfish in the Commonwealth. This was completely vetted by numerous bay scallop biologists from Massachusetts and Rhode Island. The documentation was well disseminated and has proven to benefit the fishery and the fishermen to allow the additional harvest of bay scallops. Respectfully, David F. Franzuto.
Thank you, Mr. Brace. Is there anything else you'd like to add personally or as a board member yourself?
No, I think I'm all set.
Were you a member of the board in 08?
I was not. I was a reporter for the Nantucket Independent, and
Yeah.
I covered the issue. And what Dave didn't mention was that there was a huge meeting of scallopers at 2 Fairgrounds Road in the garage, back where they used to have the planning board meetings. There must have been 60 scallopers there, and the shellfish, the state's head shellfish biologist, Mike Hickey, was there, and the SHAB board basically had a meeting, and it was anyone could comment, and that's when they told everybody about the 10 millimeters and the 2.5-inch rule, and the scallopers were to use a plastic ring, and if the scallop didn't fit inside of that, then that was a scallop that you could take. So.
Okay. Ms. Andrews?
Oh, I just wanted to confirm your observation that the nubs started appearing in the 80s, which was when I was going scalloping with my uncle more. And I would also say that I think that the size of the shells has become reduced over time since then. All of my undone Christmas light projects look a lot bigger than what's coming across the culling boards today, I think.
Mhm.
That's all.
Thank you, Ginger. Mr. Sidorowski?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. First, having looked at the regulations that were distributed, it does indicate that a well-defined growth that doesn't have to be 2.5 inches as long as it has a well-defined growth ring at least 10 millimeters high. I think that's the way it reads. I could be wrong, but I was very impacted by this dissertation from Ms. Hall, because as I read this, it seems to me, I'd like some discussion on this. It seems to me that if the nubs reproduce the way it's described, that allowing nubs to be taken might actually reduce the population in the long run of scallops. And I kind of read this as sort of like, yeah, you have a down year and you let people take a lot of these nubs, and then later you're going to pay the price. I'm not sure about that, but that's how I read the paper that was presented here. So I'd like to have some discussion about that, because I'm not so sure. I know it was discussed a long time ago, but you know, it's 12 years now, and it might be worth revisiting this question because the population of scallops has been diminishing since 2008, and I don't know if any of that is really caused by the nub effect. So I'd like to hear more about what more people who studied this and who do this every day say about this.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Peter, do we have Mr. Perkins in?
Not yet.
Okay,
We've got Kona joining us, but there's no video.
okay. I'm gonna move to the public. Before I get to Val Hall, I'd like to hear from maybe Josh or Jim. Mr. Eldridge, do you have something you'd like to say?
Yeah, where this is a state law, I think I understand what Blair's asking for and a couple other guys, but where this is a state law, I think opening this conversation is a really bad idea. It's going to have to go back to state, and there's going to have to be more tests, more studies. And we could find ourselves in a much more restrictive setting when this all comes back. They could go with a 15 millimeter growth ring and a 2 3/4 shell size. From a commercial aspect, I don't like to see this conversation open again. I think we just take what we have and go with it. Yeah, and as with Peter was saying with Dave's statement, they said in 2008, 10 millimeter size could be used. So it's been working. You know, there is definitely population issues within the harbor, but that I think is arguable due to water quality, due to environment. I think the fish faces much bigger issues with the loss of eelgrass than it does with the nub issue. But those are just my, you know.
Well, good, Josh. Thanks for sharing that. You're not alone with those feelings. I'll read a quick letter signed by Bruce Cowan, Carl Sherlin, and James Sherlin. Dear board members, this letter is to request that the Nub Rule bylaw remain as it is written. The rule as written was the result of much discussion and contention. it was a compromise between scientists, enforcement, and fishermen. With the bay scallop fishery struggling to survive, we feel it is best to keep this rule unchanged. Sincerely, Bruce Cowan, Carl Sherwin, James Sherwin. So that's been read into the record, Mr. Brace. And to reiterate what Mr. Eldridge said, Mr. Sherwin had also mentioned to me that the concern about the state, this could go in either direction. It's like opening up a Pandora's box, and we could end up with a regulation going in a direction that was not intended. And also that since it's been in effect since '08, the fishermen have learned to adjust, and we still see a proud number of fishermen surviving with the fishery as is, the way it is at the moment. So there's something to be said about that.
Andy, can I make a comment?
Please do, Mr.
Jim?
Sherwin.
Probably before '08, when we fished outside the harbor, like Co-2 area, 40th Pole a little bit. Basically, all the scallops out there were nubs. I don't hardly remember seeing any traditional growth rings on those scallops, and that was, before the nub rules in effect. And basically, the wardens just asked where we fished that day and didn't even look at them if we fished out in that area, because they understood that that's what there was there.
Okay.
So it's just, they never did. I don't think they ever lived out there for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks, Jim. Is there anybody else Peter, is there any chance you could send Mr. Perkins the phone number link so he could get on like Ginger does?
I'm working on it.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, do you want me to speak yet?
Well, without the person presenting this to us here, I'd like him to hear your testimony, simply because you'll be sharing with us years of study in the manner of science, and I feel that all parties involved should hear what you have to say and be able to absorb that. But if we don't have him on board in the next couple of minutes, then certainly, Val, I want you to speak next. Is there any other history anybody would like to add? Is Mr. Carlson still on board? Anything you'd like to add? And I know Tara would probably have something to say, but maybe after Val speak, we'd hear from Tara, unless there's something just general information that could help the board with this decision.
Yeah, if I could, I think I'd just reiterate kind of what Josh said, and then I'll leave the real heavy lifting on this subject to Tara.
Thank you.
But again, I think I reiterate that any change in this, just to kind of go over procedurally, would have to begin at the state level. Our local regulations don't have the ability to be less restrictive than state regulations. So any change in definition of bay scallop that would be less restrictive would have to start there. And kind of agree that the way the Division of Marine Fisheries has been viewing regulations lately, I think there'd be a significant amount of time and effort from their end to look into it and do some level of study as to age classes and reproductive viability, and looking at potential harvest amounts and things that may lead to it. And when you do the study, the science will speak for itself, and it may be more restrictive, it may be less restrictive. But if the fishermen are satisfied with it currently, I think that speaks volumes that it's something that they're able to do in the field. So again, I'll leave the biology of it to Val and Tara. They're much smarter than me about it. So I think I'll just leave my comments at that.
Well, Jeff, you're more in the end of dealing with the state anyway. And is it safe to say that to project that it could go in either direction if this were to be a request to the state?
Yeah, I honestly think, Andy, kind of looking at the state and the recent decisions in most fisheries, they're tending to be more restrictive and have some deal of regulation that's a little bit more strict. I think looking at some of the fin fish and see what's happened as far as reduction of harvest numbers and in size limits getting a little better defined. I think that's kind of the pattern we're seeing from them, and that's not a big surprise. I think my concern would be if this went to the state that it would end up being a more restrictive regulation.
Thank you.
Andy,
Mr. Chairman?
Who's that?
Well, Josh, it's Tom, but Josh wanted to speak. So
Okay.
whoever you choose.
Josh, please step in.
I was just going to say, in 30 plus years of attending fisheries meetings, I've never seen them reverse anything to be less restrictive when dealing with fisheries issues. The one thing that I have seen consistently is that paid for science says what you want it to say when you pay the bill. So the state's going to do wherever they want it to go. The state's going to make it go that way.
Tom, Mr. Sidlowski?
Yeah,
you, Tom.
Jeff, I want to clarify something you just said, because I thought you were saying that we're not allowed to be less restrictive than the state, but I thought that this proposal was more restrictive. Is Nantucket allowed to be more restrictive than the state without going to the state?
Yes, and I think the perfect example of that is just the harvest limit for base scallops. So currently in the state level, you can harvest up to 10 bushels per day of base scallops, and Nantucket's catch limit is 5. So you can always be. Yes, go ahead, Tom.
The proposal in front of us that was made is to make it more restrictive, not less restrictive.
No, my understanding of the proposal in front of us is that Mr. Perkins is proposing the elimination of the Nub Rule and to go back to the original definition, just requiring a well-defined raised growth annulus. And that would be less restrictive than the current definition. So I think if you wanted to make it more restrictive, you'd have to, you could go up to, it needs to be 2 3/4 inches or 3 inches would be more restrictive, but removing that interim measurement for the 10 millimeters would be a less restrictive regulation. So I think that's why it would be a state issue first, then locally Nantucket could regulate that if the state made a less restrictive regulation.
Because I'm reading this, maybe I'm wrong. I'm reading these regulations that were given to me that say that you can take a scallop with a well-defined growth ring that's at least 10 millimeters above the hinge, no matter how big it is, and that if it's located less than 10 millimeters from the hinge, it has to be 2.5 inches. So, and that's the Nub Rule. So
That is correct.
if you eliminate the Nub Rule, you are becoming more restrictive because you can only take the scallops that have a raised growth ring over 10 millimeters from the hinge. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm very confused because I thought that was what I read.
What Blair wants to do is take scallops with less than a 10 millimeter growth rate. A lot of them
Without the 2.5 inches?
without the 2.5 inches. There's a lot of scallops that are 2 1/4 that only have maybe a 3 millimeter growth ring. It's a tiny little line right at the hinge.
Okay, I didn't understand that. I thought you were just dropping the whole nub, all the nubs all together. He wants to change the Nub Rule to make it less restrictive.
To just a raised growth ring of any proportion. So it'd be just this very tiny little line right on the hinge, which, we said 1, 2 millimeters, I need my glasses on to see him that small.
Well, thank you, Josh, because I misunderstood the proposal because he's not here to tell it. So thank you.
Yeah.
I think that proposal leaves too much question in hand to the, wardening and the fishermen.
Yes. You'd have to have a magnifying glass on board. to find that growth ring, and you probably could. So, anybody else join in with us yet, Mr. Brace?
Peter, you're still on mute.
All right. Val,
Yeah.
Wait, Andy.
Do you want me to give my?
I got a message from Blair that says he's waiting. He says the message he's getting is waiting for host to start meeting, but it's not allowing him to join. But that's what I had also.
Yeah, me too. I had to go on a different through my browser with the numbers that that I got from Tara. Tara told me how to get on.
Wait, here he is. Hold on, here he is.
Great.
We see you, Blair. You got to unmute yourself down there in the bottom left. Click on the mute button. There you go.
Gotcha. Hey guys, how are you?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Sorry for the confusion there. You're not the only one. Several of us had trouble signing on tonight.
No worries.
We've begun some discussion, but we'd really like to hear your reasoning for presenting this proposal to us. So I'm gonna hand over the floor to you.
Right. So yeah, just basically, I consider myself fairly well versed in the scientific community. Been involved with a lot of research around the island and everything. I'm just, I haven't seen any peer-reviewed papers on, I was very much involved and vocal in the when this whole nub issue came up. I think it was probably about 18 years ago now, I think. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. And I just, I think it's time to revisit getting back to the old state statute. On the town's website, I've just kind of taken a couple of quotes from the town website as far as, harbor quality and all of that. And, the board has been, was designed to be adaptive, designed to learn from the outcomes of previous management actions and to respond and evolve quickly and purposefully. Right on the website, it still says, this population variability of scallops we're talking reflects fluctuations in recruitment magnified by the fact that scallops are short-lived and populations largely rely on the successful spawn and recruitment of a single year class. Then it goes on to say water quality in Nantucket waters, shellfish sustainability relies on high quality habitat and clean water, which are closely related. Best management practices for the fisheries, shellfish reseeding, and recruitment programs and protection of eelgrass habitat will only succeed if water quality is adequate. Water quality in Nantucket and Nantucket harbors is affected through multiple input pathways. We all know this, or sources such as runoff and groundwater, and by various stressors. Background levels of nitrogen, phosphate, or other nutrients can be augmented and increased by man-made or anthropogenic sources. The biggest addressable threats for the harbors come from septic systems, fertilizers, runoff, and on-the-water boat use. It goes on to say, obviously cleaning products, waste discharge. These excess nutrients serve as fertilizer, feeding algal blooms. The algal blooms increase turbidity and shading of the sea floor, depriving plants such as eelgrass of the light needed to photosynthesize. Additionally, the decomposition of algae creates conditions of low dissolved oxygen or hypoxia, which can lead to the death of fish and other marine organisms. The Massachusetts Estuaries Project reports, including Nantucket Harbor embayment system, total maximum daily loads for total nitrogen. I'm going to go by all of this. This is all on the town's website, various websites, all speaking to shellfish management and harbor quality. So my point is there's an indisputable fact that we have a water quality problem in Nantucket Harbor, and that the Nub Rule, in my view, has done absolutely nothing for the population of scallops. It continually declines, and quotas are not quotas, but catches are smaller and smaller every year. And to think that, not in my opinion, to think that nubs are the cause of this is foolish, and that water quality is the problem. We all know this, and that basically go back to what the state statute was, and forget about this nub nonsense. I'm sure wardens would be happy to. It's an enforcement nightmare, and that's my opinion on the whole thing. So I appreciate Shab taking this up on the agenda. I'd like to thank you for that. And obviously there are quite a few people on the call, so that's great. I'd love to hear the discussion.
Okay. Well, we already began some discussion where I'll read a quick letter from Bruce Cowan, Carl Sherlin, Jimmy Sherlin. Dear board members, this letter is to request that the Nub Rule bylaw remain as it is written. The rule as written was the result of much discussion and contention. It was a compromise between scientists, enforcement, and fishermen. With the bay scallop fishery struggling to survive, we feel it is best to keep the rule unchanged. A couple of people who are in attendance who are fishermen who have said the same thing. Mr. Eldridge, Jimmy's with us. He reiterated that. I'm just, you mentioned water quality, Blair, but I'm trying to relate the water quality directly to the nubs. What I'm seeing over the years is in looking at some previous information dating back as far as to the 80s, when Ken Kelly, I guess, discovered the first nub. I was mentioning having fished quite a bit in the 70s with 5 different old timers. There was never, the word nub was never used with scallops. It had never been heard of, never been seen. Scallops all had a well-defined growth ring. And it seems as though the nub isn't an issue every season. Now, this season, I spent some time with our shellfish warden, and I noticed what appeared to be more of an identity problem with some people, and especially those that may have impaired eyesight. But the nub definitely makes for some confusion. Our shellfish warden had no problems in explaining it, and was glad to explain it to every fisherman that he felt needed the explanation. So I was really impressed with how the warden dealt with it in a very calm, cool manner, and very patient, and he did take some catches, but at the same time he's sharing information and doing his best to educate. I mean, we don't see any pie plate scallops like we used to back in the 70s. The scallops have evolved into a smaller species over the past several decades. But I'd still like to, how are you relating water quality to the nub, Blair, please?
I'm not. What I'm doing is, first of all, I just want to clarify about the nub issue. The absolute authority on scallops, going back to 1906, is Belding, and in his scientific report, I recall a photograph that he provided as an adult scallop, and it was actually the picture of a nub. It had the growth ring right down next to the hinge. So I'm not saying water quality is causing nubs. What I am saying is, and I remember back when Hickey was running things at the state level, he mentioned that he's starting to see these nubs, and wherever he was seeing these nubs come up, he was finding that it was a problem with industry, a direct result with water quality. So those are his words, not mine. I'm not a scientist, so I cannot make any relationship between nubs and water quality. But what I can do is, from the research I've done, is make and based on what Belding wrote back in 1906, a very, very detailed scientific write-up about scallops and the variability, and the photographs he provided of, quote, nubs. What we're seeing is, I know that other towns have had problems with their scallop populations. They've tried a lot of different things. Everybody's trying new stuff, which is fantastic. I begrudgingly, 18 years ago, went along with the nub idea and, the enforcement. But I just think now it's time to readdress that. I think if we want to keep our scallops, we've got to stop messing around with, this enforcement of nubs and all of that. And really, realize, and as I quoted from various town websites, that water quality is the problem. That's why we're not seeing scallops. If this nub rule was working, I'd be the first one on board, but it's not working. We're still seeing declines. And I think so fishermen can sleep at night without this. And I say this with absolute 100% respect to our wardens. This is not a jab at the wardens, but there's a lot of variability in enforcement, and it's not across the board. And because it's an impossible task, you almost have to kind of like, one day these are acceptable, the next these aren't. The whole fleet fishes in one area, and a couple of guys get, the day off for taking what the entire fleet was taking. So again, this is not a jab at wardens. It's a nightmare for those guys. I would not want to be in their shoes. But, I just feel very strongly that we're losing our scallops. We have been for a long time. It's been 18 years since this nub rule went in, and, it's done nothing. And so maybe it's time to maybe it's time to hire a warden that checks lawns, and checks sewers and checks, we spend the money on that because the nub thing's not working. And yes, they are capable of contributing to the population a second time after they've spawned. But we all know that scallops are so fecund that if they're doing their job to begin with good water quality, they should be carpeting the harbors. And so this is what our problem is, not the nubs. It's water quality.
Mr. Chairman.
That's my feeling.
Just a second, Tom. Blair, I'd just like to, another comment was made by a fisherman in attendance that, bringing this to the attention of the state could backfire and the regulation could become stricter instead of lighter. And has that crossed your mind at all, Blair?
If it's for the benefit of the population of scallops, I'm all for it. But how would it become stricter? That's what I don't understand.
Well, it's been suggested that they could turn around and ask for rings to be 2 3/4 inches versus 2.5. Maybe instead of 10 millimeter, they may ask for 15 millimeter, and it's not uncommon for that to happen, and so I'm just curious if you've thought of a backfire in any way.
It has not crossed my mind because I would assume that the state would. We all know that 2 3/4 or 2.5 inch, rule, and the 10 millimeter rule was completely arbitrary. It shocked me that 2.5. I missed a season where that, and it was the same year that 2.5 inch rule came into be, and I was actually shocked the following year. Hussey Shoal was carpeted with huge seed, and every single one of them went to market because of that rule. And, I'm sure there are fishermen out there that will say that's bull, but that's absolutely 100% what happened.
No,
Seed went to market. So if you want to talk about backfires, that 2.5 inch rule backfired big time.
Yeah, no,
But,
and I witnessed that happen this year, Blair, when I spent some time with
Yeah.
JC.
And
I
the 10
witnessed,
millimeter ring, that was an arbitrary thing. I remember reading a state paper that said that this had actual scientific backing to go to the 10 millimeter. That was actually false. I remember it well, sitting in the selectman meeting when Andy Roberts said, well, why make it 25? It was originally, they wanted to go with 25 millimeter. And Andy said, well, why don't we do 10 millimeter? Because everybody's got a 10 millimeter wrench for their Honda motors, for their hauling motors, and that would make a good gauge. And that kind of got lost in that whole discussion of the papers going to the state. So what I'm saying is those numbers are arbitrary. They have no scientific, they don't protect scallops whatsoever. But, so it really has not crossed my mind that the state would do that. I don't know why they would. I think they're going to look to the fishermen, and like they usually do with draggers and everybody else. I think they'll look to the fishermen and say, well, what do you guys think? And if I get outnumbered, so be it. But I just think it was really important to bring it back to the table. And I'm in the future, I will be bringing measures to really address this water quality. I know the town's doing a great job at it so far, but we really need to do more. That's just my opinion.
all right. Mr. Sidlowski.
Just not being a commercial scalloper, and because we had discussion before, I would just like Mr. Perkins to be specific as to his proposal and tell us, because I don't know what it means to just drop the Nub Rule, specifically what he would like to be the guiding, how we would choose what scallops could be taken. What is he proposing specifically to happen?
So based on Belding studies back in 1906, the state developed a statute that just required a scallop to have a well-defined growth ring. It's very simple. Once they have that well-defined growth ring, then they are adults that have contributed to the population. And after their very short lifespan, after spawning, then they're harvestable after that. So very simply, just going back to the original state statute, requiring a well-defined growth ring, no matter where
So
it
there's
is.
no,
in the
there's
head.
no 10 millimeter, there's just a growth ring
Correct.
anywhere you can find it. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, Blair, you're familiar with Valerie Hall?
Yes. Hi, Valerie.
Hi, Blair.
She's been waiting patiently to speak.
Okay.
Valerie, I yield the microphone to you.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I've been studying nubs since 2004, so that's a long time with the Marai Mitchell Association. And the data from our studies from 2006 through 10 were actually part of my PhD dissertation, which came out in 2014. And I wanted to know how important the second spawn, which is what produces the nub, was to the population, and whether we should be conserving the results of that, the results of the nubs. So since Belding's time, and even not until really into the 70s and 80s, people didn't realize that scallops could spawn more than once during their first summer as 1-year-olds. They actually can spawn twice. There's 2 different life history patterns. There's the classic early spawn, which has always given rise to what we call the legal classic scallop. But there's a second spawn in the late summer and fall, which gives rise to the nub with that little growth ring, 10 millimeters or less from the hinge. And that's because that's how big they are when they enter their first season, their first winter. And then when the spring comes and they can start to grow again, they make the growth ring right there, as opposed to a classic, which, you know, could be 35, 40 or larger millimeters when it goes into its first winter. So, but neither of those types of scallops lives more than 2 years, but it's just that 2 to 3 months difference between the birth of the classics in the early summer and the birth of the nubs that makes all the difference in the world. And as Blair pointed out, it means that nubs can survive to spawn again during their second summer, which used to be unheard of at the time of Belding. And I found in my thesis work that those second-year nubs could actually spawn twice during their second summer, and with greater fecundity, that is the number of eggs they produce, because they're larger than the classics. They're huge. And I can see why people want to take them, because even as first-year nubs, their meats are very large. And one of the reasons for that is because I found also in my thesis work that less than 50% of those year 1 nubs, they have the growth ring already, they're going through their first full summer. Less than half of them can even spawn. They're just not old enough to spawn. They go into September, the temperatures start to fall, and they just don't spawn. They look, if you open them up, their gonads look all, the ovaries look all red, like they're going to spawn, but unless you do the histology, that is make the slides and look at them under the microscope, you can't tell for sure if they have spawned or not. And I think that that's what Jeff Mercer and others used back in 2008. They looked at a lot of scallops, hundreds of scallops, and saw that they were orangish red at the time they looked at them in September, but there's no guarantee that they actually did spawn. And so that was the whole basis of the 2.5-inch rule that I understand, was that if they were that big, that meant they spawned. Well, I've never, in all the work I've done, I've never seen any relationship between size of the scallops and whether or not they've spawned. Sometimes the little guys are more fecund than the big guys. So it's really interesting how that works. And that's true for the classic scallops as well. So when I finished my PhD, I got a paper published in 2015 where I made a population model of the bay scallop population right from Nantucket Harbor, using all the data from the studies that we'd been doing at the Marai Mitchell. And I found out that if there is a second spawn and you let those nubs survive so they can spawn that second summer, you can increase the population growth rate by 50%. So nubs are not decreasing the population. They have the capacity to increase it, or at least to preserve it and make the bay scallop population more resilient to change. And that's the problem. Our harbor is getting more stressful for the scallops. Scallops are kind of like the canary in the coal mine. They're the first to succumb to things like low oxygen and poor water quality. So the more stressful and the more fluctuating the environment it's getting, the more that second spawn seems to be important for the scallop population. However, it's true, not every summer do you have that second spawn. It all depends on the environmental conditions. But when it's there, it's really important. In fact, the year that they made the 2.5 inch rule back in 2008 was the year before that, the 2007, we looked at that population, and it looked like they had a huge, strong early spawn. So there should have been tons of classics the following summer, but they weren't there. Something happened, and we think it either happened to the larvae or the spat. Some major catastrophe happened. We weren't looking for it that year, so we missed it. But we looked for something similar in 2009, and we found that it was the rust tide, the dinoflagellate cochleidinium that, I mean, the whole harbor looked like it was, especially the head of the harbor, looked like it was full of rust-colored paint. That killed the larvae in the spat. We had spat bags that had absolutely nothing in them. They were just totally empty inside, not only of scallop spat, but of everything else that might have settled in the bag. So it's kind of like a backup plan, or what is known in the literature as bed hedging. If something happens to that early spawn, then at least you can have a backup where you have the late spawn that might keep the population going. So I'm not a big fan of the 2.5 inch rule because of what I said previous, that 2.5 inches doesn't necessarily mean they've spawned. The little guys may have spawned and the big guys may not have. There's just no way of knowing. But at least it protects the nubs to some extent. I'd prefer to see all of the nubs protected, but that would be really devastating to the fishery, I think. However, if we don't have at least the 2.5 inch rule, we have a problem. It's devastating the population not to protect the nubs somehow. So we need to do everything we can to conserve the nubs and also to keep the fishery going, because as you all know, Nantucket has just about the last remaining fishable population of bay scallops in its entire range. So it's a really precious resource to us. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Val.
Thank you, Val.
Thank you, Val.
Mr. Carlson, are you still on board?
Yes, sir. I'm still here.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks. Jeff, has there, can you speak for the shellfish warden as far as how he's felt about, dealing with the Nub Rule on the docks?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for him directly, and he is here and available if people need him. He's under my other picture. But I think as far as it goes and enforcement, I mean, again, I think we've always taken a little bit of a tact of working with fishermen and educating, and obviously this rule's been in place since, for the last 12 years. So it's been a learning curve for everybody and kind of getting there. But I think the procedures that we have in place to evaluate catches and, at our staff level, if there's a catch that's of concern, going through and measuring each scallop individually and doing that and then going over that with the fishermen afterwards at their choice, I think is a pretty solid procedure. I know it can be time consuming, but I feel like our wardens have done a pretty good job with it, and I feel like they'll continue to do a good job with it. And I feel like for the most part, the fishing guys there, we see a lot of guys with gauges on their boats now, like they should. And I feel like it's going pretty well. And I think everyone is working with the state and local regulation as best they can, just like any of the other state and local regulations.
I don't know if we ever, Jeff, what was the final bushel count for the 2019-20 season?
I know we just sent it to Val the other day. If you give me a second, I can bring it up. But off the top of my head, I feel like it was somewhere around like 7,200.
it was about an average catch. Yeah, so yeah, that sounds about right.
And the 2018-19 season was 3,000,
Oh yeah.
Yep.
I believe, because that's like the
So
lowest
to
on
answer,
record
so real
ever.
quickly, the 1920 season was 8,806. The 1819 season was 2,952, and then the season before that was 12,697. But I think I always caution with bushel counts too is that there's a lot of outside factors that go into that. A couple of those seasons have obviously more red flag days than others. Some seasons have guys that are just there's just more people fishing, and some seasons have less people fishing. So as a cumulative total, it's there, and it's also based upon reporting on catch reports and a little bit of warden verification. But it's something that looking historically, I mean, I don't think there's any question that the bay scallop harvest has gone down over time pretty substantially. But I think that, we're all working kind of within the same rules. So hopefully we can kind of make progress going forward. I know Tara had her hand up and may have more information to kind of provide to that. That would probably be helpful. So I may just throw out that she has some comments to provide as well.
Okay, Tara, it's your turn.
All right, thank you. I came to Nantucket in 2009, so it was right after the Nub Rule was in place. I personally think that, we are seeing more and more nubs, and it's because the water's staying warmer into the fall. So I feel like the spawning season when it comes to bay scallops has been extended. And, what I've seen from my research is that, we do have a lot of nubs and they are surviving the winter. I feel like they're very, very hardy. And when it comes to like resource management, as a biologist, I like to employ as many tools from our toolkit as we have, and having the nubs in place or preserving at least, a percentage of them for larval recruitment and for spawning, is really essential. I know I've talked to some other fisheries like in Long Island, Dr. Steve Tettelbach, he said he wished they had the Nub Rule. They're dealing with a lot of environmental issues right now that are beyond their control, and they just don't have the populations to kind of prime their larval pump to get the recruitment that they need to have a fishery. And, we're kind of lucky right now. We're not having the issues that they're having and having the catastrophic losses, but we could have them in the future. I personally really count on those fall spawns for contributing to our populations, because we have had a lot of harmful algae blooms that come in August since I've been here. And when those blooms are present in August, we have a lot of larvae that are naturally in the water. And if they're consuming this algae bloom, it's not a nutritious algae. They're not growing. And also it kind of impairs their respiration and their gills. And so we can lose a lot of production that way when that bloom is present. And so, I like to do spawns after August when it's possible to put larvae in the water for nubs for that reason, just to kind of hedge our bets, like Val was talking about. So, I think that if we were to make the rule less restrictive, as a resource manager, I would want to think of, okay, well, if we're allowed to take all of these nubs now, what can we do to protect our population that we have right now? And, that would involve, in my mind, looking at closures to certain aspects of the fishery. And I don't think that would be a very popular choice either. So, there are a lot of ways to look at this. I think Val has done some really important research. There isn't a lot of other people that have done this type of research. And I think it's been really, really valuable to look at and to consider. And, just from looking at our surveys that we did last year, we had 60% seed and we had 20% classics and 20% nubs. So it does make up a substantial part of our population. And, it might not be important to have them every year, but I think, you know, on certain years, you definitely want to have them. So I think it's important to keep, you know, this rule in place for right now. And I guess the question I would pose to you, Blair, is I would, you know, wonder, like, in addition to Val's work and, you know, what you see the town doing, you know, aside from getting rid of the Nub Rule, what would you like to have seen? What would you like to see done? Like, what specific research or what specific work would you like to see undertaken to look at this more? And that's all I have.
Blair, do you have an answer for that, or like to add some
Sure.
comment?
Yeah, I'd
Thanks.
like to take this opportunity to thank Val and Tara tremendously for their work. I think it's really important. I guess to answer Tara's question, I have 5 boats. I've never used suds on any one of them. It's a pipe dream, but I'd love to see boat washdowns banned or restricted tremendously. I'd love to see a warden hired by the town to really address fertilizer runoff, you know, fertilizer use. It's a great bylaw we have, but without enforcement, nothing happens. I follow landscapers around all the time, and there are some that are very responsible, and I applaud them, but most are not. They want to sell that fertilizer and get it on there, and it's really a shame. When you see an electric green lawn on the island, you know it's had 2 things: fertilizer, you know, a lot of fertilizer and a lot of water. So so that's just to answer that question. But what I'm hearing from all the research, and Val, I have been following your research a long time, and it's great stuff. I love it. What I'm seeing though is you know, these nubs, yep, they contribute for sure, and I think they always have. Even back, obviously there are more numbers. I trust Tara's observations that nubs are becoming more prevalent. My question back would be, what are we going to do if all of a sudden they're all nubs over a 10-year period? What if there are no legit, you know, scallops? You know, that, and you know, because that is possible. If we're seeing many more nubs showing up in our waters, are we destined to have nothing but nubs, and then our fishery crashes? What I'm also seeing is, my observations are that if you can throw all the spawn you want into the harbor, if the conditions aren't right, and I think both of them would agree with this, if the conditions aren't right, you're not going to have scallops. You're not going to have a successful spawn. So, you know, what we have is a recruitment problem. We've been, if, you know, and I just want to say this again, if the Nub Rule was working, we'd be seeing a graduated increase of scallops in the harbor, and we're not seeing that. So I think our approach is wrong. I think the scallops are so fecund that if we can really, and I'd be willing to wait, you know, fine, address water quality, get the water quality going in the other direction, then eliminate the Nub Rule. That perhaps might be a better approach. But I really feel strongly that I saw a quote where there were 3,000 boats in the harbor. I think it's more than that now. I think that was an old town report. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if there are 4,000 boats in the harbor. And, you know, between scour from the moorings and boat washdowns and, you know, all of this stuff, these poor things don't have a chance. You know, maybe that's where my discussion should go. Let's address water quality more than what we are already. Again, the town is doing an amazing job. I have no doubt about that. And I'm very appreciative of that. But, you know, we've got a real serious issue here, and it's happened in every other port throughout the range, as Val pointed out. So we really need to do something here.
Mr. Chairman, could I answer?
Please, Valerie, yes.
One of the questions you said was about the fecundity. Yes, scallops are very fecund, but that's their strategy. Any animal, most marine invertebrates do that. They spew out millions of eggs, because the chance that any one of those eggs is going to get fertilized, it's going to make it through its larval phase, it's going to make it through settlement and metamorphosis, and actually get recruited in the population is minute. It's like less than 1%. So, and that's natural. That's not going to change. Yes, true, environmental conditions are a factor in probably making things worse. But even under the best conditions, scallops are still going to do that. They're just still going to pour out those eggs so that just that few, 1% or less, will make it all the way. So that's a problem. That's a fecundity problem that's just been, as they've evolved that way. The second thing I think that you mentioned, which I thought was quite intriguing, was, are we ever going to only have the fall spawn and lose the first spawn? I don't know. I mean, our climate is changing. And I've noticed over the years that the early spawn is later in maybe later in June, maybe even early July. And then the later spawn is getting more into September. Down in Long Island, it's October. So I don't think we're ever going to lose it, but I think that the second spawn may be becoming more important than the first spawn because of all these other environmental factors going on. But again, it's every year is different. Every year is so fluctuating that our environment, especially when the scallops live in an estuary the way it does, you just don't know what's going to happen year after year. Tara, do you have anything to add to that? Just wondered if.
No, I agree with what you're saying. I would probably just add that, you know, looking at the information from this year, Blair, we have had some early spawns from, I think, in between, mid-June to mid-July. And, you know, we've had really, really good numbers in our spat bags in different areas like Third Bend, Quays, and Little Neck out in Nantucket. So I think, you know, I personally feel like we'll always have those spawns too. It's just a matter of, you know, I think August is just like a tough month for larval shellfish, whether it's the hot water or it's an algae bloom or whatever. So I think it's good to, you know, be able to have the option to have those spawns occur later in the year when the water temperature and the environmental, you know, parameters are a little bit more friendly to the larval shellfish.
Thank you, Val. Thank you, Tara. Tara, I'm going to have a question for you in a minute, and also for Jeff. Blair, I'd like to mention a couple of things. You know, as you know, we're simply an advisory board. We do not make any regulations. We can only suggest them. And we have a lot of discussion about water quality at every one of our meetings. And we've thrown some ideas around that really haven't gotten anywhere. But as far as like the population of boats in the harbor, I was kind of hoping with COVID this year there'd be fewer boats and maybe we'd see a measurable difference in a positive direction. Obviously, that's not the case because I see just as many boats as you're seeing out there, and it's a lot, and for a lengthier period of time. But you know, we've had thoughts of, you know, having a limit on the amount of moorings that are out there, which there is now, but should we lower the limit or create a mooring field outside the jetties, especially for some of these larger boats? You mentioned the suds. We're all about it, you know, and when we bring it up, we're told, you know, such as the boat basin has some requirements there. They only allow a organic product to be used. Have these organic products been studied? We don't know that. as far as the fertilizers go, I think all of us would like to see fertilizers banned back in Hyannis and not even brought over here. The electric green lawn that you're seeing, I mean, we've mentioned at our meetings, and we're seeing lawns that are so green they're blue now. So I mean, what are they adding to the fertilizer to get that blue tinge to their lawn? I can only imagine it's magnesium or something like that. But so, Blair, if you ever have an idea that could help us move forward with cleaning up our waters, we'd love to hear it. Jeff, on fertilizer enforcement, your department supposed to be, correct me if I'm wrong, please, Jeff, working in conjunction with the health department on fertilizer enforcement. Were you able to hire another person that's directly involved with that? Or did the health department hire another staff member that's directly involved with that? What has it been like this summer with the fertilizer enforcement? Is there any information you could share with us?
So, yeah, absolutely. So we definitely are partnered with the Nantucket Health Department, who are the keepers of that regulation through the Board of Health, to do fertilizer inspections. And I would actually go as far as saying that this year, especially early in the season, we probably did substantially more inspections, because at the same time we were also tasked with the phase 1 reopening for the COVID protocols, where construction and landscapers went back to work, and we're having to actively kind of patrol during the workday to make sure that landscapers were wearing proper PPE and following social distancing rules as well, which actually gave us substantially more boots on the ground, one, and then also inspection time. But in the last 3 years, we have had dedicated staff from our office, and then also anywhere from 1 to 3 health inspectors on a daily basis that are out either responding to or just out on active patrol in various parts of the island, depending upon what we're seeing. And we typically begin those patrols anywhere from a week to 10 days before the start of the regulatorily allowed fertilizer season. And then we continue those patrols all the way through the end in the middle of October. So we continue to do them. We do see, I tend to agree with Blair, that there are definitely landscapers that do a better job than others. We've enhanced our program in trying to do more day-to-day trainings for the guys that are boots on the ground for those folks, and not just high-level trainings. We've offered calibration services to people for spreaders. I know we've calibrated folks up in our Jetties parking lot here and swept up fertilizer. We've worked with places like Nantucket Golf Club and some of the other spots to get people to be able to do it correctly. But there's always opportunity to improve, and I tend to agree that if we had more folks to do it, it would be better and provide some better trainings as well. But I really feel like where that program has come from, and when the Article 68 work group first published their BMP, that program has come a long way, and there's been a lot of lessons learned, and I really feel like it's making strides forward, and will hopefully continue to make positive gains and help with water quality.
Thanks, Jeff. And a quick question for Tara. Will there ever be a time, can you project, that we will be able to distinguish the product that you create versus the naturally made product in the harbor as far as scallops go?
That's a project that we're actually working on right now with NSA and the UMass Field Station. We're taking some hatchery spawn scallops. We actually started it last year, and they're doing some isotope studies on it. Mostly like a proof of concept project right now to see basically like the hatchery scallops, if they have like a fingerprint that would link them back to the hatchery. So that's something that we're working on. And yeah, I'll just keep you updated on how that goes.
Thank you, Tara. Board members, Peter, Mr. Brace.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
I just want to reiterate a little bit of what Dave said earlier in the meeting. The Nub Rule, the 10 millimeter and the 2.5 inch measurements, that was all instituted in 2008, 12 years ago. And I remember Doug Smith, Smitty, going to a lot of the hearings off island and reporting back to Shab and then bringing the question up at the big meeting that they had at Fairgrounds, 2 Fairgrounds Road in the back where the planning board met when all the scalpers showed up. And, you know, the question was, okay, fine, the Nub Rule is gonna happen. So can we ever change it? And I think Mr. Hickey said, you know, let's give it 10 years. Let's give it some time to gather more research. And so here we are, we're 12 years later. And it's not just the town that can make the change, it's the state. This is obviously not going to happen until, you know, sometime after this coming season. It's not going to impact the season. But, you know, if we all decide that this is what we want to do, it's going to be a long slog. We got to convince the state. The selectmen would be relatively easy to convince if we're all in a unified front. But it's, you know, I mean, Blair, you got a steep hill to climb because you've got to convince the shellfish biologists as the state that this is the thing to do. And there's some people in this group right here that don't necessarily agree with you. They want to work with you, but I'm just, you're a patient man, I know you are, but wondering what you think about that task, because it isn't just us recommending to the select board, hey, we think you should do this. We're recommending that you do this, and having the select board saying, okay. It's us saying that to the select board and the select board saying that to the state, and then hearings, and then so.
Thank you, Peter. Ginger, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did kind of. For me, the issue of water temperature is the nub issue, and water quality is a different issue, and so changing one won't really affect the other. I think the nubs reflect an adaptation on the part of the scallop, and living creatures do the best they can to survive. And if they're making nubs, which I think they always did, it's just that to me a nub growth ring was not necessarily well defined. So I wouldn't have included nubs as I wouldn't have considered 10 millimeters enough anyway. However, so I certainly think that nubs should be spared as much as possible. I'd kind of support a larger size than the 2.5 inches so as not to take seed. It's confusing because, as my father said years and years ago, sometimes adult scallops don't have a growth ring, sometimes seed does. It's never going to be entirely clear cut, but the water quality is definitely something that we as a board talk about all the time, and how to implement that is it's not easy. At one point I thought maybe if we could just have a lawns of shame page, but you know, nobody really wanted that idea. So I just if you're going to open the can of worms, be prepared to not be able to fit them all back in, I guess, is my ultimate contribution.
Thank you, Ginger. Well, Blair, you mentioned earlier that, you know, you're flexible and patient, and as I don't know if you can see here, we have 4 board members present, 3 are absent. If there's a board member willing to or eager to entertain a motion, I will accept the motion. If not, this is probably discussion we will continue till we have more of a full board in participation. But you have anything else you'd like to add this evening, Blair? Please take this time now.
Just to respond to Peter, yeah, I mean, Nantucket was ground zero when the state addressed this to begin with. So, no, I don't, sure, it may very well be an uphill battle. It's not a, it's not a battle that I'm trying to work with everyone, and certainly I'm not going to go against, there are a lot of people on this board. There are a lot of people on this screen right now that I respect beyond belief. Ginger being one of them. The point is, just to answer Peter's thing is, yeah, it all started here to begin with. So, if that's what happens, if that's what transpires on the island again to bring it to the state level, then so be it. But I find Ginger's comments interesting, that they're two separate things, water quality and water temperature. That very well may be the case, and we may be witnessing the end of scallops that we know of, simply because the waters are warming. Heck, we're getting black sea bass showing up more than I've ever seen in my life, this sort of thing. So, it's not a hill I'm going to die on with it reintroducing or abolishing the nub thing. I just, I'm trying to get a discussion going that, and sure, the discussion's been happening for years, and it's getting critical now. And, I used to love scalloping, and now the enforcement thing is so hard these days, and so many fishermen are still confused about, the whole thing. It's really difficult. I no longer enjoy scalloping because of it. I don't mind the hard work. It's just, not knowing when you come to the dock. It just makes it really difficult. But I'm really glad this board took it up. There's some great stuff being said. Really appreciate it. And, that's all I want to say.
Well, Blair, thank you. It's certainly been an ongoing issue. We hear comments about the nubs every year, and we certainly want to stay on top of it. And if scallops over time continue to get smaller, certainly there'll be argument to possibly change gauges. We certainly don't want to be letting adults die off. We extended the season 2 years ago, even though it's the worst season on record. We worked diligently on that because there was proof of there being a large amount of adult scallops left out there. We want to see these scallops fished. We want to see them in the markets. We want to see them enjoyed on people's tables. So certainly we're willing to hear your comments, your feelings, your thoughts at any time. Glad to entertain it at any meeting. And I'd certainly like to continue this discussion at our next meeting, and unless a board member would like to move forward with a different proposal on that. So is there any other discussion from board members? Any other discussion from the public or staff?
Andy, can I make a comment?
Mr. Sherlin?
I think something that might help would be for the Natural Resource Department to hand out a paper copy of the regulations with any changes for the year in red when scalpers pick up their license. I know it's posted online, but I think it's good to have it in hand. Some people don't go online, like my father, for instance. I know that used to be a thing, that the regulations were handed out Just thought.
No one reads them. We do hand them out.
Certainly,
I think that's something, just to respond to that, is we can definitely make sure that guys, when they get their license, I know a couple of years ago, after the 2016 regulatory change, we physically mailed a hard copy to all commercial license holders. And there hasn't been a change since then, but we're happy to make sure that people have that. Anyone that's been a new, like an apprentice license or a new license, we have definitely handed out a hard copy, but we can certainly make sure that folks, when they come in, have at least the opportunity to pick up that copy if they so choose.
Okay.
That's
Thanks.
a good idea, Jim. Thank you.
How many licenses sold this year, Jeff? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I apologize. I don't know. I'd have to check with Joanne tomorrow, but I'm happy to send that to you.
All right. Any other discussion? Anybody, would anybody like to, any board members like to propose a motion?
I could propose a motion, we adjourn.
Is there a second to the motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor to adjourn? This means, excuse me, we'll be continuing this discussion at our next meeting?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. I need to do that by roll call. Mr. Brace,
Aye.
Mr. Sidlowski,
Aye.
Ms. Andrews,
Aye.
Mr. Lowell votes aye. Motion's been made, seconded, and unanimous vote to adjourn. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next meeting, September 15th.
Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Thank you, Tara, Jeff, Val. Good night. Thank you, Peter. Josh.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Eddie.